What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is Guys at Magic, and I'm going to be your host, Dave. Today, I'm going to be taking you through a deck tech for Chiss-Goria Forged Tyrant. This is one of the legendary creatures we got out of All Will Be One, but this is one of the Commander straight cards that we ended up getting from that set. So this is a legendary creature dragon that costs 6 and 3 red for a massive 9 mana, but don't worry about that. It does have affinity for artifacts. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that ability, it says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Aside from that, though, this is a 5/4 with flying and haste, and it says whenever it attacks, exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast an artifact spell from among them this turn, and if you do, it has affinity for artifacts. What we want to be doing in a deck like this is making sure that we get Chiss-Goria out and play as soon as we possibly can, and then using its ability to make sure that we're gaining incremental advantage over our opponents. Now, pretty obviously, this is going to be an artifact-heavy based deck. That's really going to be our card advantage going to be coming in from that, as well as the fact that this has affinity for artifacts, and we never actually want to cast this thing for the 9 mana that it normally costs without that. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into some of our creatures. The first bit of our creature package is going to be focused primarily on mana dorks, or creatures that can tap 4 mana. So here we've got a couple of mirror to help us out. The first one is Alloy Mirror. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature mirror. It's a 2/2 that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Now, we do have a couple of other mana dorks, but one of the things that I really love about these cards is that not only can they tap for mana, but just by passively sitting on the battlefield, Alloy Mirror is actually to be able to count for 2 of the mana of the 9 that we're going to be able to need to get our commander into play. One for just kind of sitting around, and then the other one for tapping for it. We also have Iron Mirror in this list. This is 2 mana for an artifact creature mirror. It's a 1/1 that you can tap for a red mana. Palladium Mirror, which is 3 mana for a 2/2. You can tap it to add 2 colorless mana. And Ornithopter of Paradise, which is 2 mana for an artifact creature thopter. It's a 0/2 with flying that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. You love to see any of these creatures in your opening hand because it does help to massively reduce the overall cost of our commander, allowing us to get it in play much, much sooner. As far as some of the other creatures in this deck, this next group that we're going to talk about are going to be primarily going to be in here as general support creatures, but the theme here being is that they are all artifacts themselves. So the first one here is Brea's Apprentice. This is 2 and a red for an artifact creature human artificer. It is a 2/3 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless thopter artifact creature token with flying. It also has an ability where you can tap it and sacrifice an artifact to choose 1. You can exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card, or you can have target creature get +2/+0 until end of turn. In all honesty, I actually haven't used either of these abilities a whole lot whenever it comes to just general design and playtesting for the deck. However, I do love the fact that for 3 mana you do get 2 artifact creatures in play, which really helps out with that affinity ability on our commander. Next up, we have Canoptic Spider. This is 5 mana for an artifact creature spider. It's a 4/4 with flying, and it has an ability that says whenever another non-token artifact creature or a vehicle enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Now, our commander isn't actually going to be drawing us cards with its ability, but it does have a pretty significant amount of card advantage so long as we can continue to swing in. I did want to also make sure that we have some backup card draw engines in this deck, and Canoptic Spider does an excellent job there. We have Hope of Girapur in this list. It's a single mana for a legendary artifact creature thopter. It's a 1/1 with flying, and it says you can sacrifice it. And until your next turn, target player who was dealt combat damage by the Hope of Girapur this turn can't cast non-creature spells. It has a nice little kind of interference effect there. Plus, this is coming down on just a 1-drop, so we love seeing this card in our opening hand. Liberator Urza's Battle Thopter makes this list. It is 3 mana for a legendary artifact creature thopter. It's a 1/2 and it has flash and flying. It says you may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had haste. It also says whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator Urza Battle Thopter's power, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So giving it the additional abilities there of having our stuff gain flash is really nice. Plus, in the late game, this can actually serve as a beater in and of itself. Very similarly, we are also going to be throwing in Shimmer Mirror. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature mirror. It's a 2/2 with flash and says you may cast artifact spells as though they had flash. These 2 cards are basically going to serve the same function in the deck, but the Liberator is a little bit more of a threat because it's got some built-in evasion, and then also it can have a much bigger body. Lizard Blades is a really fun one in a list like this. This is 1 and a red for an artifact creature equipment lizard. It is a 1/1 with double strike, and it says the equipped creature has double strike. It's got a reconfigure cost of 2. So if you want to be able to drop this early on, just be able to make sure that you're getting a creature into play, it'll help you out that way. And then later on, you can turn this into the equipment by using its reconfigure cost and being able to actually throw this on the commander. That way you can deal in extra damage. Really nice there. We have Solemn Simulacrum in this list. This is 4 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature golem. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. It also says whenever it dies, you may draw a card. We have a couple of artifact creatures in here that really kind of support more of a go wide strategy. It's not necessarily what we want to be doing, but it is something that is at least going to be an option and available to us. A lot of our creatures are artifact creatures, so it does help us to be able to pump the team a little bit. The first one here being Chief of the Foundry. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 2/3 and says other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. Very similarly, we have Steel Overseer. This is 2 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 1/1 that you can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. Now, super important to note is that our commander is actually not an artifact creature, so it is still really important that we be able to drop things like this into play, but don't expect them to be pumping your commander anytime soon. Lastly, here in this package, we do have Crypt Thrall. This is 4 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 3/3, and it says other artifact creatures you control have hexproof. Just a little bit of an extra way for us to be able to protect our things. Since we are going to be playing an artifact creature-based deck, there are a couple of artifact creatures that do a wonderful job of recursion, and we're going to include 3 of them here. The first of which being Junk Diver. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature bird. It is a 1/1 with flying and says whenever it dies, return another artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Mere Retriever is 2 mana for an artifact creature Mere. It is a 1/1 and says whenever it dies, return another artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So both of these are going to just be able to help make sure that we get a little bit of extra recursion, and if we need to, they're excellent just to sit back on blocks and be able to accrue that value. We also have Scrap Trawler here to round out our recursion package. This is 3 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 3/2 and says whenever it or another artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser mana value. So this is a repeatable effect unlike the other two, so it adds a little bit of extra value. Scrap Trawler is a fantastic card in a list like this. Some of our larger creatures that we want to be able to cheat into play, the first of which being Cityscape Leveler. This is 8 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's an 8/8 with trample, and it says whenever you cast a spell and whenever it attacks, destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a tapped Power Stone token, and this does have an Unearth ability of 8 mana. This is a really impactful card, and considering that we are going to be playing in mono red, there's not really a ton of great removal in a list like this. So Cityscape Leveler is a card that's going to be able to help take care of any of the nasty things that our opponent's going to be playing, as well as being able to serve as a pretty sizable body itself. Along the same road there, we have Steel Hellkite. This is 6 mana for an artifact creature dragon. It's a 5/5 and has flying. You can pay 2 to give it +1/+0 until end of turn, and you can pay X to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value of X whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate only once each turn. Steel Hellkite, just like the last card I mentioned, is going to be another really important piece for removal. Really good job of being able to mop up any kind of like token deck, or if your opponents do happen to have multiple permanents of the same mana value, Steel Hellkite does a number on them there as well. Platinum Angel is just a great card to have. This is 7 mana for an artifact creature angel. It is a 4/4 with flying and says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. And Combustible Gearhulk is 4 and 2 red for an artifact creature construct. It is a 6/6 with first strike and says whenever it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, you mill 3 cards. Then Combustible Gearhulk deals damage to that player equal to the total mana value of those cards. We are going to be playing a deck that is obviously very focused on artifacts. We're also playing a deck that does have quite a few really expensive drops that we're hoping to be able to cheat into play with our commander's ability. So with that being said, Combustible Gearhulk hopefully is just a 6 mana 6/6 with first strike that draws us 3 cards. And in the case that our opponent does decide to have us mill those, we've got a recursion package, and there is a very strong likelihood that those 3 cards that we flip will deal some serious damage. We do have a couple of non-artifact creatures in this list as well. The first two that we're going to talk about are going to be in here mainly for support. The first of which being Thopter Engineer. This is 2 and a red for a creature human artificer. It is a 1/3 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Which, although that's nice, we really want it in here for the other reason, and that is because it says artifact creatures you control have haste. So any additional artifact creature, which is the majority of our deck, would then be able to come in and we won't have to worry about summoning sickness. The next one here being Audacious Reshapers. This is 2 and a red for a creature human artificer. It is a 3/3 that you can tap, sacrifice an artifact, and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an artifact card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Audacious Reshapers deals damage to you equal to the number of cards revealed this way. Now that is supposed to be a bit of a downside, and there is the opportunity for you to kind of dig a little bit more extensively, but going around and playtesting, I don't think I've ever had this card hit me for more than, I want to say, 5, and that was at absolute worst, where I'm just kind of flipping over land after land after land. Audacious Reshapers is in a list like this because, as we're going to come across here in just a little bit, we do have a pretty decent token package, whether that be through Thopters or whether it be through treasure tokens. So being able to pop a treasure token and turn it into potentially maybe something like that Cityscape Leveler that we talked about earlier is really, really impactful. We do have a couple of other really big creatures whenever it comes to this list, and sadly, although they are not artifact creatures themselves, they do maybe care about artifacts a little bit. The other thing here being with this group of creatures is we can't have a Dragon at the helm of a deck and only be playing with 1, so we've got 4 more we need to talk about. The first of which here being Atsushi, the Blazing Sky. This is 2 and 2 red for a legendary creature Dragon Spirit. It is a 4/4 with flying and trample. It says whenever it dies, choose 1. The first mode says exile the top 2 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play those cards. The second mode says create 3 treasure tokens. In a deck like this, that creating 3 treasure tokens is really important. Not only does that help to make sure that we are always hitting our mana, but it's also going to be able to help reduce the cost of our commander just by having those tokens sit in play. Now, do keep in mind, you don't want to sacrifice them for your commander because they're not going to really net you anything on that. You'll be adding, I'm assuming, a red, and then you'll be losing an artifact, so his affinity is going to be bouncing up and down. But Atsushi, on its own, pretty impactful card. It's 4 mana for a 4/4. It's got flying and trample, so it'll be able to sit there as a blocker or be able to get in for some beats if you needed to. Plus, whenever it does die, it's going to just do extra work. Hellkite Tyrant is in this list. This is 4 and 2 red for a creature dragon. It's a 6/5 with flying and trample. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you gain control of all artifacts that player controls. It also says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Being able to steal our opponent's stuff is really, really powerful. Not only does it help to accelerate us, but it also just kind of completely shuts them down. We'll take away all their mana rocks and anything else they might have. The other portion of this card is actually very doable in a list like this. It's not impossible for you to hit that 20 or more artifacts, so it is something to kind of keep an eye out for. We have Hellkite Igniter in this list as just kind of a really big beater. This is 5 and 2 red for a creature dragon. It's a 5/5 with flying and haste that you could pay 1 and a red to give it +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Once again, for the most part, I mean, that's going to be something like pay 2 mana and give this thing +5, +6, or even more power. The last dragon we're going to talk about here is Goldspan Dragon. This is 3 and 2 red for a creature dragon. It's a 4/4 with flying and haste, and it says whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. And then, of course, it also says treasures you control can tap and sacrifice to add 2 mana of any one color. So a nice little token producer there, also stapled onto a pretty important body. The last creature that we're going to talk about here, sadly not a dragon, and also not an artifact, but is just way too good in a list like this not to include, is Neheb the Eternal. This is 3 and 2 red for a total of 5 mana. It's a legendary creature zombie minotaur warrior. It is a 4/6 with Afflict 3. For those of you who don't remember, Afflict 3, the way that works is it says whenever this creature becomes blocked, the defending player loses 3 life. It also says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add a red mana to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. If we swing in with our commander and are able to connect, that's 5 red mana we're going to add to our mana pool for our second main phase. That is so powerful. We want to make sure that our commander is out as soon as possible, as well as either being protected or being buffed up to make sure that we're going to close the game out a little bit sooner. With that being said, we do have an equipment package in this list. The first card we're going to talk about here is Commander's Plate. This is a single mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has protection from each color that is not in your commander's color identity. It has an equip cost for a commander of 3 and an equip cost for any other creature of 5. For a total of 4 mana, you can give your commander protection from white, blue, black, and green, as well as giving it a buff. This is going to make sure that your commander is going to stick around, be able to continue to beat down, and be a huge pain in the butt for your opponents to get rid of. Embercleave is in here. This is 4 and 2 red for a legendary artifact equipment. It has flash and says that it costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may attach it to a creature you control. And it says the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample. So a nice little boost once again for our commander. We've got the Reaver Cleaver in here. This is 2 and a red. It's a legendary artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. It's got an equip cost of 3. If we can equip this to our commander and get in for damage, that's going to be 6 treasure tokens that we're going to make. Not only is it going to be able to help us ramp up, but in the case that our commander does die, if we do have those 6 treasure tokens still in play, that's really going to be able to benefit us to be able to recast, because it's going to make our cost reduction on our commander just so significant. We have Shadow Spear here for a single mana. You get a legendary artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/+1, has lifelink and trample. It also has another ability where you can pay a single mana and permanents your opponent's control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It's got an equip cost of 2. To help make sure that our commander stays alive, we are going to be running both Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. Lightning Greaves is 2 mana for an artifact equipment, says the equipped creature has haste and shroud, and has an equip cost of 0. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 mana for an artifact equipment that says the equipped creature has hexproof and haste and has an equip cost of 1. We are going to be making sure that we are running both of these because this deck really revolves around that dragon. And if Chiss ends up dying, we need to be able to make sure that we can get him back on his feet and swinging as soon as possible. So both of these cards are going to help to make sure that he does not go back to the command zone anytime soon. Some of the other artifacts we're going to be running here, we do have some mana ramp in the form of artifact ramp, the first of which being Arcane Signet, which is 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, so red. We have Mind Stone, which is 2 mana that you can tap for a colorless. You can also pay 1, tap, sack it, and draw a card. Felwar Stone, which is 2 mana that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land that an opponent controls could produce. Fire Diamond, which is 2 mana for an artifact that enters the battlefield tapped and can later tap for a red mana. And Thought Vessel, which is 2 mana for an artifact that says you have no maximum hand size, you can tap it for a colorless. As always, seeing as how we are playing a game of Commander, we're going to be throwing Soul Ring in here. This is 1 mana for an artifact that can tap for 2. And then we do have 3 other mana rocks in this list that I consider a little bit more non-traditional, some cards that actually don't make the cut in every list. The first of which being Hedron Archive. This is 4 mana for an artifact that we can tap for 2 colorless mana, or we can pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. So it helps us out whenever it comes to ramp, kind of also helps us out if we need a card draw. We are going to be running Dragon's Horde in this list. It's 3 mana for an artifact that says whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, put a gold counter on it. You can tap it and remove a gold counter from it to draw a card, or you can tap it and add 1 mana of any color. We do have a couple of dragons in this list, so I felt like this card did actually kind of serve a spot. Plus, it does a really good job whenever it comes to drawing us cards, and also helping to make sure that Chiss gets in play a little bit sooner. Lastly here, as far as our artifact ramp package goes, we're going to be running the Might Stone and Weak Stone. This is 5 mana for a legendary artifact, Power Stone. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Either draw 2 cards, or target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. And then you can also tap this to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. It says that this mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. So do keep in mind, can't help you out whenever it comes to your commander, but it'll help you out with the vast majority of other creatures in the list. Now, both of those modes on this card are really important. This deck being in mono red doesn't really have the best draw package, so being able to draw 2 cards on the ETB of this is really nice. At the same time, being in mono red, we don't actually have the best removal package either. So being able to give something -5/-5 until end of turn is also really important. We can use that to kind of stifle one of our opponents, maybe kill one of their commanders. If you thought we were done with the artifacts, we are most certainly not. We are going to be running Endless Atlas in here as just kind of a general, utility piece. This is 2 mana for an artifact. We can pay 2 mana and tap it to draw a card. It says activate this ability only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. We are a monocolor deck, so the majority of our lands are just going to be mountains. Endless Atlas works really well here, being able to help us out whenever it comes to our card draw. As well as card draw goes in general card advantage, we are going to be running Mystic Forge. Mystic Forge is 4 mana for an artifact that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library. And if you don't like what you see, you can always tap it, pay 1 life, and exile the top card of your library. Hopefully that allows you to continue to chain things together. We have 3 really big and kind of expensive artifacts in this list that we would love to be able to flip over and potentially even get into play for free. The first of which being Darksteel Forge. This is 9 mana for an artifact that says artifacts you control are indestructible. And this does count itself, by the way. Mycosynth Lannis is 6 mana for an artifact that says all permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. All cards that are not on the battlefield, spells, and permanents are colorless, and players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. This is going to be able to help us out a little bit more, just making sure that all of our things are artifacts. It really helps us to be able to recast Chiss in the case that he does end up going back to the command zone, because all of those mountains that we put into play and all the rest of the lands from earlier are going to be counting towards that affinity at that point. Portal to Phyrexia is 9 mana for an artifact. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. It also says at the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So Portal to Phyrexia is a bit more on the expensive side. We are really trying to be able to cheat this one in using that affinity ability that Chiss is going to be able to give to this if we rip this one off the top. This is a card that is going to help to limit our opponents. Hopefully, in some circumstances, it might actually even just like act as a board wipe. And then past that point, it's just going to accrue additional value for every turn that this thing sits in play by being able to rip cards out of our opponent's graveyards or from our graveyards and just being able to put it right back into play. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we do have one more artifact, and I did really want to include this, but it actually has a mana cost of 0. This one is Tormod's Crypt. It's an artifact that you can tap it and sacrifice it, exile target player's graveyard. I did want to make sure we had at least one way in this deck for us to be able to hit graveyards, and I figured Tormod's Crypt, being 0 mana, is a card that we can get into play immediately and help to already reduce the overall cost of Chiss without necessarily really having to pay into it. The other thing here being is I know that Tormod's Crypt is a kind of one-and-done effect, but whenever it comes to playing around with opponents who have graveyard-based strategies, if you do drop this on turn 1, they either have the tendency to either A, play into it, which means they're going to flood their graveyard right away, so you're going to be able to get some good value with Tormod's Crypt, or B, they might be really hesitant to actually start dumping things into the graveyard, knowing that you have the ability to shut them off at any point in time. So it does at least kind of force a graveyard player to kind of play around this card to an extent and be very mindful that this is going to be something that it is going to come up at some point. We have 2 enchantments that we're going to be running here, the first of which is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This is 2 and a red for an enchantment saga. On the first mode, it says create a 2/2 Goblin Shaman creature token with, whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. The second mode says you may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. And the third mode says exile this saga, return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. Once the saga flips, it transforms into the reflection of Kiki-Jiki. It's an enchantment creature, Goblin Shaman. It's a 2/2 that you can pay 1 and tap it to create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. The reason why I wanted to include this enchantment is not only because that little goblin from the very beginning is going to be able to get in, make sure that we get some treasure tokens and help us ramp, but if this saga does flip and we do get the reflection of Kiki-Jiki, we can start making copies of some of our larger creatures or just general utility creatures that have nice ETBs. So it is nice to be able to just kind of get that constant value coming out of a card like this. The next enchantment and last enchantment in this list is Aggravated Assault. This is 2 and a red for an enchantment. You can pay 3 and 2 red to untap all creatures you control. After this main phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase and activate only as a sorcery. This card is so powerful in this list because our commander cares about being able to get in. He drastically reduces the overall cost of things. He's going to give us card advantage. And in the case that we have either the Reaver Cleaver attached to him or we have Neheb the Eternal in play, chances are every time our commander is connecting, we're going to be getting back 5 or more mana, depending on how big our commander is at that point. This actually does, with either of those cards, form kind of a pseudo-infinite loop. So long as you continue to pay into it, you'll be able to continue to swing and just get more and more and more value. Moving on, let's go ahead and talk about some of the instants and sorceries. We do have 2 board wipes in this list, the first of which being Blasphemous Act. That is 8 and a red for a sorcery that says it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and it'll deal 13 damage to each creature. Keep in mind this is going to hit your stuff too. We have Chain Reaction, which is 2 and 2 red for a sorcery. It says Chain Reaction deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So they both pretty much kind of do the exact same thing. They're really good whenever they're both going to scale and really want to be able to cast whenever there's a lot of creatures in play, which is totally fine because for the most part, that's the point of a board wipe. As far as some of our single target removal go in this list, we are going to be running a Braid. It is 1 and a red for an instant that says choose 1. It'll deal either 3 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. I do like the flexibility of a Braid, which is why it's making this list. I do understand, however, that 3 damage is not going to be able to kill everything. As far as it goes, whenever it comes to dealing with different permanents, we are going to be running Chaos Warp, which is 2 and a red for an instant that says the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals cards from the top of their library. If it is a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. There is a whiff potential with Chaos Warp, which is really nice. Just to keep in mind, you can't hit anything, and they are going to shuffle it back in. So Chaos Warp is a great card, and they're just capable of dealing with any permanent. So whether that be a creature or anything more extensive, we can try to make sure that our opponent gets it tucked away. Similarly is Wild Magic Surge. This is 2 red mana for an instant that says destroy target permanent and opponent controls. Its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a permanent card that shares a card type with that permanent. Then they put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. Unlike Chaos Warp, Wild Magic Surge is not going to whiff. If you destroyed a creature, they're just going to flip over until they get the next creature. You're just kind of taking a gamble and a hope that whatever they flip into is less impactful than what you just got rid of. We are going to be running by force in this list. This is X and red for a sorcery that says destroy X target artifacts. This is going to be a way for us to be able to cast this and just make sure we're blowing up all of our opponent's mana rocks, utility artifacts, whatever they may have in play. And then because we are in mono red, there's not a ton of great removal. We are going to be running Shatterskull Smashing in this list. It provides a little bit of utility for us. The way that this card works is it's got 2 different faces to it. We can cast a Shatterskull Smashing for X and 2 red for a sorcery, and if we do that, it says that it deals X damage divided as we choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, it deals twice X damage divided as I choose amongst those permanents instead. So it's a nice little removal piece. In the case that we don't need this as a removal piece, or if we're desperately hurting for mana, we can always have this enter the battlefield as a land on its backside. So if we do that, it enters in as Shatterskull the Hammer Pass. It is a land that says that as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it can tap for a red. I love the flexibility of this card. Having this drop and immediately take 3 of your life away is pretty steep, especially considering this thing only taps for a red once it's in play, but it does provide that utility, so it's going to make the list here. We have 2 filtering cards dedicated to this list, the first of which is Big Score. This is 3 and a red for an instant that says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. It says draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. The second one here is Unexpected Windfall. This is 2 and 2 red for a total of 4 mana. It is an instant and says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. It says, draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. I love the fact that these cards generate those treasure tokens, and that's why they're mainly going to be in this list. Not only do they help to filter our hand, but they also help out with that affinity for artifacts clause on our commander, hopefully getting him into play a little bit sooner. The next 2 sorceries that I'm going to talk about are more so of Powerhouse plays. The first one here being Scrap Mastery. This is 3 and 2 red for a sorcery that says each player exiles all artifact cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all artifacts they control, then puts all artifacts they exile this way onto the battlefield. You're playing an artifact-based deck, and you're hopefully not playing up against one whenever you cast this. What this is going to be able to do is make sure that we clear off any artifact that's currently in play. So if our opponents happen to have a bunch of mana ramp, we can get rid of all of that. We're then going to end up returning all of the things from our graveyard back to the battlefield. So there is a recursive component to this as well. Just keep in mind that our opponents are going to be returning things from their graveyard as well. Now, ideally, you would cast this in a situation where maybe you had 5 or 6 impactful artifacts in the graveyard and you don't have anything left in play, and maybe all of your opponents still have their Soul Ring and their Felwar Stone or whatever artifact ramp they're going to be playing around with. That way you can cast this, get your stuff back, and then just completely stutter up your opponents there by getting rid of their artifact ramp or utility artifacts. So Scrap Mastery, kind of a haymaker. This card is a lot of fun. Just kind of keep an eyeball on what's in your opponent's graveyards whenever you do this. The other big play sorcery that we're including here is Seize the Day. This is 3 and a red for a sorcery that says untap target creature. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase, and it does have a flashback of 2 and a red. So Seize the Day is really important because it does have that flashback ability. If we want to, we can use this to get an additional combat step. If we have enough mana, we can actually pay for the Seize the Day and then later on for the flashback in the same turn to make sure that we're getting 3 combat steps in. That should be enough for us to just be able to bury one of our opponents, accrue a ton of advantage off of our commander's ability, and hopefully just like run away with a game. There are 2 Planeswalkers going to be making the list here, the first of which being Duretti Scrap Savant. This is 3 and a red for a Planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty. Its first ability is a +2, and it says discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards. Its -2 says sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And its -10 says you get an emblem with whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return the card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. All 3 of these modes work really well in this list. The +2 being able to filter and making sure that we're constantly hitting good cards. The -2, that recursion ability, is oh so sweet. And in the case that we do manage to ever pop this thing for its ult, it is game breaking. Making sure that our opponents just can never really get rid of our things is so powerful. Next up, we have Ugin the Ineffable. This is 6 mana for a legendary Planeswalker Ugin. It enters with 4 loyalty, and it says colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. It's got a +1 that says exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When this token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into your hand, and it's got a -3 destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Its static ability can be really important because it helps us to ramp up. Its +1 is actually kind of oddly important in this deck. The number of times in playtesting with this that I've had Ugin and also Mystic Forge in play is really actually kind of an odd synergy. If I don't like the card on the top of the library, I can either pay 1 with the Mystic Forge, or I can always use the plus on Ugin to get rid of it. That way I can potentially continue to chain. And then also, as I've mentioned already in this video, this is a mono red deck, so removal is sadly not really going to be the best thing that this color is going to be capable of doing. So that -3 is going to be something that is going to be crucial to a deck like this. From here on out, it's going to take us into our land package. The first land we're going to talk about is Buried Ruin. This is a land that you can tap for a colorless, where you can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice a return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Command Beacon is a land that you can tap for a colorless, or you can tap it, sacrifice it, and put your commander in your hand from the command zone. In a deck like this, I do think the Command Beacon is an absolute must, with our commander starting originally at 9 mana and then potentially going up to 11 in the case that it dies. It is so important that we be able to get this thing back into our hand. That way we can eventually ever play with it again. I know that it has affinity for artifacts, obviously so, but even with that being said, this is a commander that can very easily be locked out of the game. We've got War Realm, which you can tap to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 3 to tap it and pay, I guess in this case, just 1 life. You're going to pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity to draw a card. We also have the Mycosynth Gardens. This is a land, it's a sphere that you can tap to add a colorless. You can pay 1, tap it, and add 1 mana of any color. Or you can pay X, tap it, and it becomes a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value of X. So a little bit of flexibility on a card like this, plus I guess if you ever actually do need it, it is mana fixing. There was one time playtesting this deck where I actually did need to kind of dump mana into this to make a red. Kind of silly in a deck like this. I know it's monocolored, but still, it's there if you need it. We also have a couple of artifact lands that kind of function not only to be able to tap for mana, but also count towards that artifact affinity, so going to help us out there too. Darksteel Citadel, it's an artifact land with Indestructible that you can tap to add a colorless. Great Furnace is an artifact land that you can tap to add a red, and Power Depot is an artifact land that enters the battlefield tapped. You can add a colorless into your mana pool. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. And Treasure Vault is also an artifact land that you can tap to add a colorless. Later on, you can pay 2x to tap and sacrifice to create X treasure tokens. I love artifact lands in a list like this because not only do they tap to produce mana on their own, but they also count towards that affinity for our commander. So really impactful, really important. I love seeing these cards in our opening hand. And then lastly, to finish this deck up, we are going to be running 27 mountains, just basic mountains here. One of the wonderful things about playing in a monocolored deck is you don't really need to worry too much about a mana base. As far as how this deck is currently going, this is running right now at about $366 in total. You can definitely skim this thing up if you wanted to. There are a couple of creatures in here that are a little bit more on the expensive side. And then I also know other cards in here like Fabled Mirror Breaker, although it's an enchantment, and it is nice in a deck like this if you are trying to build this thing for a little bit cheaper. That card is currently going for a little over 20 bucks. So there are ways to skim this thing up if you want to go that route. All in all, this is a deck that is quite a bit of fun. It does snowball out of control very quickly. So if you like being able to smash in with big things, if you like cheating stuff into play, this 100% could be a deck for you. This, however, is absolutely a glass cannon deck. This is a deck that if your commander does end up getting killed or biting the bullet, it becomes incredibly expensive very quickly. And if your opponents are capable of removing some of your artifacts set up from the very beginning of the game, this can quickly turn into a deck where you're going to sit back and you're going to watch your opponents play Magic. So I do at least want to advise that. This deck is a ton of fun to play around with, though. Whenever things are going well for you, this deck really just kind of goes absolutely nuts. So, ton of fun, just kind of high risk, high reward. If you like that style of play, this 100% is going to be a deck that's up your alley. Alrighty, everybody, thank you so much for sticking with us throughout this video. Please do us a huge favor. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Also, comment on this video. We love all the feedback. In fact, actually, the inspiration for this deck tech was actually one of our viewers' comments. So if you want us to do another legendary creature, if you want us to do a deck tech, please make a comment down below. We love getting that feedback. We want to make content that you want to watch. Make sure that you also support us on our other social media platforms. We're on Instagram and TikTok, both the guys at Magic. And until next time, peace.